Eventually, as I was looking through all these videos, this YouTuber popped up in my sidebar. And, it had an interesting, clickbaity title. And it was something about the truth about therapy, or it was something to do with depression and self-help and bettering yourself, and it looked interesting to me. I clicked on it, and it was this Canadian YouTuber, and I think you guys know where I'm going with this if you're familiar with these circles, but it was Stefan Molneux.
So why did I bother showing you that clip? Well, it's from a video by Faraday Speaks. In it, he outlines his descent into the alt-right pipeline. He basically says that he began that descent by clicking on a Stefan Molyneux video, and over a fairly lengthy amount of time, he was slowly radicalized by Molyneux, as well as the increasingly far-right videos and commentators that YouTube kept recommending to him. There have been news stories written about how YouTube's algorithms potentially increase the chances of being radicalized, and any YouTuber who has been doing this for any length of time will tell you that collaborating with other creators is a great way of growing your audience, and having your content potentially show up in the sidebar or recommended tab whenever someone views that video. And sometimes, even if they're viewing another video, but the algorithm makes a connection due to that collaboration, that the viewer might like the content of that person. So, if I do a collaboration with Atheist Creator 121, their content will more likely be featured in my sidebar when someone watches my video, especially the one we collaborated on, and vice versa. And this matters because of the topic. I'd like to talk about irresponsibly platforming people. I can already hear people furiously typing in the comment section, but GC, we should be open to talk about anything. You're against free speech, you monster. But let's get those shallow criticisms out of the way first. When I say irresponsibly platform, the key word is irresponsible. We'll get into exactly what I mean a bit later in the video, but what I don't mean is that we shouldn't talk to people we disagree with. I'm also going to use a fairly recent rationality rules debate he had with Stefan Molyneux to illustrate my point. But, dear God, why did it have to be over 2 hours long? Now, this isn't because I just want to take a swing at RR, but because it's the most recent example I know and care about. Although, he does seem to have a way of running into right-wingers and fascist sympathizers.
The worst case scenario for the alt-right success in this endeavor is less intolerable to me and my family than the SJW success. And so from a tactical evaluation, I have to choose this angle. I have to try and explain to the alt-right that they can get what they want and they should take this gambit.
Well,
even if it means the end of liberal democracy.
But hey, maybe that's just a bit of bad luck. Or he wants to test his mettle in the crucible of ideas. Whatever the case, the debate I'm going to use certainly is not the most egregious example of irresponsible platforming I could come up with. Some people have made a career of having far-right mouthpieces on and irresponsibly platforming them. Although, I do have some skin in the game, since I openly criticized this particular debate on Twitter by pointing out that maybe platforming an alt-right white nationalist misogynist and legitimizing them by pretending they have anything worth listening to in the field of ethics might not be such a hot idea. I mean, he is a race realist and openly said that maybe Poland is super peaceful because it's mostly white. And he did routinely talk about how many eggs women have and seems super obsessed with how many babies they should have too. But this isn't really about Molyneux. I think most people would admit that he's not the sort of person they'd want to promote. However, Cosmic Skeptic, that great bastion of rationality, came to RR's defense by completely strawmanning what I said. But I admit, I sort of expected that, since I know they're friends in real life. What I didn't expect was Matt Dillahunty writing in and saying my concern was stupid, even though it was nice to see both Matt and CS get a little pushback by their own fans, because honestly, what I said was completely reasonable. And if either didn't understand my point because of the layer upon layer of sarcasm I coded it in, then they could have asked for clarification. However, it does seem that Matt understands what irresponsibly platforming someone means, since he told someone, while I was writing this script, that he wasn't into promoting someone who pushes dangerous conspiracy theories. You know, like race realism, Matt? That kind of dangerous conspiracy theory? Like Molyneux pushes Matt? I guess it's not asinine when Matt does it, though. Okay, with all that behind, let's talk about the actual subject of this video, irresponsible platforming. If you're going to have a white nationalist on your large channel, you should first make sure you're prepared to debate their bad ideas. Otherwise, you risk making them look rational, skeptical, and all the other things that people like to believe they are. When tackling extreme ideologies like white supremacy, you had better make sure you know the subject inside and out, because Molyneux and people like him have probably taken years to perfect their argument. They likely know how the conversation is likely to unfold, and they have tried and true answers to the most obvious objections you might raise. Second, you might want to ask yourself if it's worth having them on. Are their ideas spreading at an alarming rate? Do they have a dangerous toehold in the marketplace of ideas? In this case, I'd say yes. Both misogyny and white supremacy are on the rise. Molyneux had a large audience before he was banned from YouTube. And I can easily see why someone might think that debating those bad ideas in video format, interview, or even a debate is worthwhile and maybe even necessary. And then I'd ask myself, what should be the topic of debate? And if your answer is some obscure branch of ethics, a topic I'd argue Molyneux has no business being taken seriously on anyway, instead of the misogyny and white nationalism your guest is known for, I'd say you're irresponsibly platforming that person. If you agree to go on their channel and legitimize them as some sort of expert on ethics, instead of talking about the very real damage they've been doing for years, I'd argue that's irresponsible platforming. You are giving them access to your audience. Some of your audience may watch that video, and even though they might agree with your stance on ethics, they may decide that the white nationalist sounds pretty reasonable. Hell, it was a good talk. Maybe they'll decide to look at some of their content. And now you've potentially increased the chances of even more people being radicalized. And Molyneux knows this. He's a veteran. He knows how YouTube works. He knows how best to draw in new subscribers. And honestly, if I was an alt-right douche, I'd be trying to weasel myself into the atheist community and their fan base too, because not much seems tastier than an audience who likes to discount feelings and is sure of their own rational skepticism. That's the kind of attitude that an alt-righter can take advantage of, because all they have to do is make it seem as if the evidence is on their side, and you can get people to buy into all kinds of abhorrent ideas, such as anti-trans propaganda, or in this case, white nationalism. But there are good ways of exposing these charlatans. I'd point towards David Pakman's interview of Richard Spencer, or even Christopher Hitchens' interview with John Metzger. The difference being that both Hitchens and Pakman came prepared. They weren't talking about an obscure branch of ethics, but about the dangerously bad ideas that those two men stood for. And you could tell that both Pakman and Hitchens found the white nationalists distasteful. While the talks were civil, they weren't friendly. I think I've made my point clearly here, but I just wanted to explore a bit of the RR Molyneux debate to finish it off. I personally found it interesting to see how Molyneux tries to manipulate the audience and RR. He starts doing this right from the beginning.
Steve and I are both atheists, and we are both very pro-science, and we're into objective reality, we're into reason, we're into empiricism, and self-contradictory thoughts are invalid. And I mean, I think I speak for you in far as all of that goes. So this is the funny thing, that we have an enormous amount in common, I guess, like brothers who fight the most or whatever, but we do have a huge overlap, and we're both trying to deal with this issue. How the hell do you get morality without the commandments that come from a deity?
As you saw, he opens up by trying to create a link of commonality between himself and RR, and by extension, RR's audience. Even this part should have evoked a massive pushback from RR, in my opinion. Imagine a race realist sitting across from you and saying that you're a lot alike because you're both men of science, reason, empiricism, and rationality. Meanwhile, he's known for pushing race realism and other conspiracy theories. But Molyneux's goal here is to tell RR's audience that even though he and RR might disagree on this whole ethics thing, they have enough in common that they might want to check out his content too. He's essentially manipulating RR into smiling and agreeing with him about how similar they are, and he's hoping that this will be enough to convince some of RR's audience to look at his work. Maybe over time, he can get them hooked, and maybe even get a few Patreon bucks out of them. RR thinks this is about ethics, but it's really not. That's just the icing on the shit cake.
We talked earlier about the columns and pillars of smoke rolling across America at the moment. That's people who don't believe that they can reason with each other, and so they're taken to the streets and there's violence. If we lose reason, if we lose the conversation, we gain nothing but endless war and conflict. And of course, we saw this in Europe with 300 years of civil war based upon religious groups trying to wrestle control of various state governments in order to impose their views on everyone else and avoid having other people's views imposed upon them, to the point where Europe said the only way we can survive is to separate church and state.
Here he's putting in some of his talking points. He's creating this oversimplified version of events happening in the US, and somehow he's boiled it all down to just people not being able to reason. It has nothing to do with hundreds of years of slavery, Jim Crow, systemic racism, police brutality, economic inequality, and the rise of fascism in America, among other things. It's just people not reasoning. And Molyneux likes to set himself up as some sort of defender of reason, while everyone else is just violent and unreasonable. Molyneux is a hero who stands, shield of rational skepticism and philosophy held high before him, ready to repel the baying horde.
And, you know, like, I mean, for like, I don't know, like 15 years, I've been talking about the dangers of increased leftist violence and racial conflict and all of this. And, you know, sadly, you know, if it turns out that you're right, that at least tells people that your theory has some potential merit. So that's, I think, where truth, you know, logical consistency maps onto reality as best as we can tell. That's about as high a bar as we can set.
That part comes in around the 45-minute mark of the debate. Once again, he's starting to introduce some of his right-wing talking points. Again, RR just sits there staring blankly ahead. He doesn't bring up how Molyneux pushes race realism, white nationalism, and ultimately adds to the bonfire of racial conflict. He doesn't push back against the assertion that the left is unusually violent when right-wing terrorism is on the rise worldwide. He just allows him to keep talking, even though what he's saying is absolute nonsense. And this in turn, whether RR intends it or not, tells his audience that he, at the very least, tacitly agrees with what Molyneux is saying.
Basically, I think there's about 16, 17 flaws with UPB, and particularly there's 4 of them which are game-ending, as it were.
Wow, so if the flaws in UPB are years, it can almost vote. That's great. A couple more and it can drink in the States. Anyway, go on.
So I just kept this part in to illustrate how comfortable Molyneux is. He's cracking jokes because he knows that RR isn't going to do much, if any, pushing back against his bad ideas. He'll push back against his ethics arguments, sure, but that's not really why Molyneux is here.
Situation, but
no, this is like you had this. I actually got really pissed off when I watched that video of yours because I thought you were portraying me as a Nazi because you had that scene from *Inglourious Bastards*. Because you were indicating that my philosophy, if taken to its logical conclusion, would have you giving up Jews to Nazis. And I've been real clear about that once you have a gun pointed to your head, you're no longer in a moral situation.
And here Molyneux is fishing. He wants to know if RR thinks he's a Nazi. This is a perfect opportunity to bring up Molyneux's well-known white nationalist ideas. But again, RR just laughs and denies he meant anything offensive by the clip he used. It's also really weird that Molyneux would immediately jump to the conclusion that using a movie clip that features Nazis meant that he was being portrayed as a Nazi. However, I do want to point out one bright point in this debate. At one point, RR brings up Molyneux's book, which is specifically about the topic they're debating, and Molyneux immediately gets angry and accuses RR of ambushing him. Seriously, he thinks he's being ambushed by quotes from his own book on the subject they've decided to debate. I doubt RR will watch this, and if he does, I doubt he'll make it this far, but I honestly enjoyed watching this part.
Okay, so if I wanted to prove to you that the Earth is a sphere, and my first premise was the Earth is a sphere, and then you said to me, you're begging the question, and I said, no, because I give evidences elsewhere, my argument is still begging the question. Those arguments over there, which can be laid out in premises, may not be begging the question, but it's still begging the question. So I guess
no, I can't go with you there. I don't have the text in front of me, but I go through a lot of effort to establish the validity of UPB. So saying I just state it and that's begging the question, come on. I mean, let's be fair about that.
No, so I don't. If I'm honest with you, I just don't think you understand begging the question. And I apologize if that comes across in any demeaning way. It is not.
Well, no, I don't have the text in front of me, so I mean, I don't know what context you're quoting in.
It doesn't. A syllogism doesn't need context if it's guilty of certain logical fallacies.
No, because if I say UPB is valid, and then I say here's all the arguments why, and you say, well, you're saying UPB is valid, and that's back. Let's not do this part. This part is, I think, beneath both of us. Let's see if we can get on. Because you got to tell me, if you want to start quoting my book, then you got to give me the quote ahead of time so that I can see the context of what it is. You're just pulling one sentence out and saying that's begging the question. That's boring for the audience. And, email me and I'll sort of provide something else. But I can't sort of pull up the text and see what else is around there and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have the context for that.
And it's even more funny when you realize that Molyneux has certainly done his research on RR. He goes through listing titles of RR's videos.
I mean, you have videos like 9 Proofs of Evolution, why evolution is true. In other words, why evolution is accurate to explain biological history, the world, and so on, why evolution is true, and certainly more true than something like creationism, which I certainly agree with you on. So you got 9 proofs of evolution, why evolution is true. You've got dozens of videos with the words debunked. You've got Big Bang debunked, 3 justifications for scriptural slavery debunked. Everyone is religious debunked, and so on. And there's rebuttals and so on, right? So
brings up RR's terrible videos on trans athletes.
That you did a video on transgender athletes and you made some mistakes and you publicly put out a video apologizing and correcting your errors, which I think is a noble and good thing to do.
And then drops a bomb. He starts talking about genetics and IQ, which is the starting point to getting someone to accept race realism and eventually white nationalism. He's basically ceding the ground, and RR doesn't do much about it.
The fact statement is that we have characteristics that we do not earn. That are like, so for instance, IQ is largely genetic. And so the matter of intelligence is not something that we can take personal pride in how smart we are. I mean, obviously, there's some things we can do to help and improve it. There's 10 to 20% that's in play.
But near the end of the debate, Molyneux starts unleashing some of his libertarian nonsense. And I think this is the moment when RR really comes to the realization that he's being used.
You know, that's pretty wild to me.
Libertarianism in order to somehow poison the well, because most of the audience is a libertarian. You almost want them to know that I'm not a libertarian. I know that you are claiming, no, I'm just using an example like this. You know, a lot of your audience are right-wing leaning, so you want to bring up the fact that I defend trans people. Like, this all feels like poisoning the well. But that's not an argument.
You can have your feelings, but maybe we could just talk about the facts.
Absolutely, just talk about the facts. I don't know how many times I can say it to you with these different examples. It's hypothetical imperative.
One thing, though. I don't know if you're aware of this, but a lot of your audience is right-wing as well, RR. Probably due to your trans athlete video, platforming of Molyneux and Sargon, and your praise of other right-wing commentators. At the very end, Molyneux goes off about Antifa and violence and yada yada yada, but I think I've made my point here. In closing, I'd like to say that talking to people like Molyneux isn't necessarily unethical, but I'd argue having him on for this farce certainly was. There's a million people more qualified to talk about ethics than Molyneux. Hell, there's even active moral philosophers. A little while later, RR had a discussion about ethics with Shannon Q, who isn't a white nationalist scumbag trying to manipulate his audience into going to her channel. I think irresponsibly platforming people like Molyneux is dangerous. And content creators, myself included, should think a little more deeply about how we use our platforms. Thanks for watching. If you found value here, please like and subscribe. If you really enjoyed this video, perhaps you'll consider supporting my work on Patreon. Take care and cheers.
You take me home, invite me in. The lights go down and we begin.